Brazil was one of the top places for Atlantic Africans to be brought in the New World, most of them coming from two regions, West Central Africa, which includes Angola, as well as the Bight of Benin, with the Bight of Biafra, Upper Guinea, and Gold Coast making minor contributions. Of the 5 million people forcibly brought to Brazil, around 3/4 of them left from what we now know as Luanda, Angola, due to it being a straight shot to Brazil, the headquarters of Portuguese trading operations. Taking second, we have the Bight of Benin, much of its trade being centered in Anejo, or Little Popo. Next, we have Elmina, which was of minor influence. It was ran by the Portuguese on the Gold Coast, the Bight of Biafra, any coming from Calabar in today's Nigeria, as well as Basu, located in the Upper Guinea, with these three places having a minor but significant impact on the Brazilian gene pool. So if you take a DNA test, you might get a lot of Angola, followed by Nigeria, Togo, and Benin, and possibly Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, with a smidgen of Senegambian. Make sure you follow and like for more to go.
Hi lovelies, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Belinda Burrs or Belly Dirt Stranad. Don't forget to please subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so that anytime I upload videos, you will be the first person to be notified. To my returning subscribers, to those people that share my videos, leave commentaries, and educate each and every one of us, you guys are the real MVP. So lovelies, I'm gonna be your today's host, and I have so many statistics to put up here, and we are gonna come back to talk about it. Alright lovelies, let's dive into today's video.
Slavery ended, Brazil looked around and panicked. How do you run a country where the majority is black if you built that country on the belief that whiteness is superior? Don't worry guys, I got the answer. You whiten it. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Brazil launched a national project of branqueamento. Okay, I can't even pronounce that shit. Racial whitening. Okay, this wasn't just social pressure. It was government policy. Brazil passed laws and offered incentives to import white European immigrants by the millions, especially Italians, Germans, Portuguese, and Eastern Europeans. Between 1890 and 1930, over 4 million white immigrants came to Brazil. They were prioritized for jobs, land, education, and access to credit. Black and mixed-race Brazilians were pushed further to the margins. The idea was simple and terrifying. If white people married into black families over generations, the blackness would fade out. In fact, a 1911 government report predicted that, quote-unquote, the Negro will disappear within 70 years. That's not sci-fi, that's genocide via assimilation, government sanctioned. Okay, on top of that, Brazil erased the category of black from censuses for decades. People were encouraged to self-identify as Merino or Pardo or Mulatto. Anything but black.
When the South lost the American Civil War, more than 10,000 Confederates moved to Brazil, and many of their descendants, known as Confederados, are still there today proudly waving the Confederate flag. You may be wondering, why of all places did they choose Brazil? During the Civil War, the then Emperor of Brazil, Dom Pedro II, strongly supported the Confederacy. When the Confederates lost in 1865, he invited them to Brazil and offered them land as low as 22 cents an acre, subsidized their transportation, provided temporary lodging upon arrival, and offered them quick citizenship. Slavery was still legal in Brazil at the time, and the population largely supported it, making moving there all the more enticing for Confederates. Slavery was eventually made illegal in Brazil in 1888, during which there was a small wave of immigration back to the South in the United States. Today, thousands in Brazil still celebrate the Confederacy, proudly waving the flag and hosting festivals to celebrate their roots. They're at the heart of a lot of the same controversy we see in the US regarding the Confederacy and what it means, with a lot of people protesting the flag and what it symbolizes. This above me translates to something along the lines of bring down Confederate flag and we don't stand for hate. Many towns in Brazil have also banned or tried to ban the Confederate flag.
Cases of slavery is normal in Brazil. A black woman called Sonia was kept as a slave by a judge for decades. As a judge, a man with power, he forced the justice to make her return to his house, and now she continued to be a slave. Unfortunately, this is the reality of Brazil, and I have a project to fight against this. My project is to create sustainable eco-villages. Here in Brazil, we call them quilombos, cities in the middle of the forest where money did not exist. The society is a circle and not a pyramid. It was where Africans and indigenous people fled slavery and fought for freedom. A place where food is free, a place where electricity is free, a place where we can live for love and not for money. If you want to help me to create this, you can click in the link in the bio and you can make donations for my project. My name is Zezeu, and a lot of peace in your heart. hope and life.
Hey, in another world news story, we got some more slavery in Brazil. Even after, 135 some years, they still are catching people who have slaves. So they got the modern day slavery that, they have to fight against out there in Brazil. Not to mention that, the police is gunning down the blacks over there as well. This modern day slavery that they have, they say it has skyrocketed. Like they actually have like slave hunters out there. And they just keep these people in captivity like forever, and most of them don't even really know that they're slaves. Some of them, they do try to escape. But let me just show you the video game. Like, it's so crazy over there. It's like it's back in 1920s. Look at this video game that came out. So Google got some goddamn explaining to do. They had this in the app store, and basically it was a slavery simulator game. In this video game, you were buying black slaves, and they have the slave catchers. You got to purchase guards. The guards are slaves. This video game was off the chain, and there was people who were downloading this left and right. You know what I mean? It's just honestly disturbing and disgusting that these people are still going through this. They still have actual slavery to this day, and it's stemming all from the transatlantic slave trade. I was just doing an update on Brazil to see what was going on with the slavery, because I did a report like last year ago, and it was just showing me, things that I had previously done. So now doing this update here, they have a video game, a slavery video game out in Brazil. But drop a comment on this shit if you heard about it. If you're in Brazil, definitely chime in. What the hell is going on over there? Peace out and stay safe.
Celebrations for Slavery Abolition Day happened in Brazil on May 13, 1888.
What if I told you that there's one particular area in Brazil that identifies as 80% African descendants? So Salvador Bahia is known as the most Afro-populated city due to the fact that it played a huge role in the transatlantic slave, right? Majority of the slaves that were brought to Brazil were brought to the Bahia, Salvador. So slavery went on for about 300 years, right? And a lot of people think that, Brazil, they ended their regime of slavery way before the U.S. did. That is not the case. They were about 20 years apart. But here's the thing, Brazil handled the ending of slavery very differently than America. And what do I mean by that specifically? Well, as we all know, slavery was a part of why the Civil War happened. In Brazil, everybody started rebelling. There was public pressure, not to mention a lot of slaves were escaping, and even wealthy Brazilians, they were like, yeah, no, this isn't right. And so at around 1888, Brazil passed a golden law, which was pretty much two things. Slave owners did not get compensation for losing their slaves. They did not get compensation at all. They lost their slaves, and that is that. And every slave, okay, every person who was a slave is to be freed instantly. There is no part of Brazil that continued on with slavery. That meant that every slave had to be freed. It's not like America where the South didn't want to let go of their slaves and they were, bitching about it. No. Every slave went free instantly. Also, fun fact, my great-great-grandpa was actually a slave. He was from Nigeria originally, but they brought him over to Brazil, but he was a little kid when, slavery ended. And then he later on got with my great-great-grandmother, who was Italian. And yeah, they pretty much started the whole family line. That's why most of my family in Brazil, especially in Salvador, which a lot of my family are, they are all Afro descendants. They all look black. So yeah, Brazil, they ended slavery in a more professional, cleaner, and better way than the US did. And at the time, they had a lot more slaves than America had. They had roughly around 4.8 million, which at the time, the US had around 200,000 slaves living in America. So if you really do the math, that's around 10 times more than what the US had. And keep in mind, they were also the largest slave importer in the entire Western Hemisphere. Like, they were up by a massive amount.
Slavery ended, Brazil looked around and panicked. How do you run a country where most of your population is black? If your entire nation was built on the belief that whiteness means superiority, that is the question Brazil had to answer in the late 80s. And their answer wasn't freedom, equality, or justice, it was whitening. The elites decided that the way forward wasn't to heal from slavery, it was to erase blackness, not symbolically but biologically. A national project to breed out the African blood that had built the country in the first place. In the late 80s and early 90s, Brazil launched what they call a racial whitening project, and this wasn't some fragile idea whispered in racist corners. It was government policy. The Brazilian state passed laws to favor European immigrants, especially Italians, Germans, Portuguese, and Eastern Europeans. They were offered land, jobs, education, credit, and a clear path to citizenship. Meanwhile, the very descendants of enslaved Africans, the people who had built the sugar plantations, the coffee industry, the gold mines, were left with nothing. They were pushed out of the cities, out of jobs, out of schools, out of hope. Between 1890 and 1903, more than 3 million Europeans were brought into Brazil. The government idea was simple. If enough white people came and if enough mixed marriages happened, the darker races would simply fade away. This wasn't just cultural genocide, it was genetic warfare. In 1911, a government report even predicted, quote, the Negro will disappear within 17 years. Think about that. A government threw down a countdown for a black people would vanish. That is not science fiction, that is genocide by assimilation. And to make it worse, they erased the very concept of being black. For decades, Brazilian census removed black as an option. People were encouraged to identify as Moreno, Prado, Mulatto, anything but Preto, anything but black. Because if there were no black people on paper, then racism didn't exist. Most of the world doesn't realize this, but Brazil was the largest importer of enslaved Africans in history, while the United States received around 400,000 Africans. Brazil received 5 million sold torn from the continent, chained and shipped across the Atlantic. The majority came from West Central Africa, especially Angola. Lunda, a port city still alive today, was one of the biggest slave exporting hubs in human history. From there, ships sailed almost directly to Baham, Pehambu, and Rio de Janeiro. Next came the Bridge of Benin, centered in Leto Pumpu, present-day Togo, and parts of Benin. Then the Bridge of Biafra, which included places like Calabar in Nigeria. There were also smaller numbers from the Gold Coast, Ghana, and Upper Guinea, which covers part of Liberia and Sierra Leone. So if you are Afro-Brazilian today and you take a DNA test, you will likely see Angola and Congo in your results, followed by Nigeria, Benin, and Togo, with traces from Ghana, Liberia, and Senegal. That is the genetic map of a people who built Africa. But the story doesn't end with slavery. When slavery was finally abolished in 1888, the last country in the Americas to do so, Brazil didn't free its people. It abandoned them. There was no land reform, no repatriation, no schools, no recognition, just poverty, marginalization, and propaganda, telling them to whiten themselves if they ever wanted a chance at life. Now, here's where it gets even more twisted. When American Civil War ended in 1865 and the Confederates lost tens of thousands of defeated Sultanians, white slavery owners didn't give up on their dream. They simply moved. Over 10,000 Confederates fled the United States and moved to Brazil, and guess who welcomed them? Dom Pedro II, the Emperor of Brazil. He offered them land at 20 cents an acre, paid for their transportation, gave them temporary housing, and granted them citizenship almost immediately. Why? Because these were experienced plantation owners. They knew how to run slave economies, and slavery was still legal in Brazil. To the Confederates, Brazil looked like paradise, a place where they could keep their slaves and their pride. And they did. They called their new home Americana. And to this day, their descendants, the Confederados, still live there, still wave Confederate flags, still dress in antebellum clothes, and still celebrate their heritage as if it were something noble. Everywhere they host festivals in São Paulo with Confederate banner flying and Southern music playing. They say it's about culture, but it's the same defense used in the US, logically for a time built on human suffering. Meanwhile, Afro-Brazilians continue to fight systemic racism, police violence, and economic exclusion. That is the equal reality of Brazil, a country that loves black culture, samba, capoeira, carnival, but fears black people. Fast forward to today, you did think slavery would be distant memory, right? But Brazil still struggles with model-day slavery, forced labor, debt bondage, and domestic servitude. In 2023 and 2024 alone, hundreds of people were rescued from slavery-like conditions in rural areas. Many of them were black. Many didn't even realize they were considered slaves. They just knew they were trapped. The government has slave hunter units, inspectors who raid farms and factories where workers are kept without pay, under threats, isolated from society in 2025, and yet Brazil still finds itself fighting the ghost of slavery that refuses to die. And then came something that sent shockwave worldwide, a slave trade simulator video game. Yes, a real game that appeared on app stores in Brazil, where players could buy and sell black slaves, hire guards, and build plantations. It was disgusting, dehumanizing, a mockery of centuries of suffering. The public outrage was massive, the game was pulled down, but the damage was done. It revealed something deeper, that part of society still sees slavery as a joke, as entertainment, as history of exploits, not history to heal. Now let's talk about the story of Suna, a model-day black woman in Brazil. She was enslaved, yes, enslaved by a judge for decades. Even after she escaped, the system forced her back into his home. Imagine that, a sitting judge, someone sworn to uphold justice, keeping another human being as property, and the law protected him. This is not ancient history, this is now. Brazil's legal system built during slavery still carries its DNA. The police killed more black people per year in Brazil than the entire US does. Black Brazilians are more likely to be poor, unemployed, or incarcerated. And yet, Brazil markets itself to the world as a racial democracy. That is the lie. That everyone is equal, that color doesn't matter, is a comfortable illusion, but it hides centuries of structural racism. But no, not everyone accepts that lie. Across Brazil, people are reclaiming their heritage. Afro-Brazilians are discovering their African roots, their languages, their regions, and their history. They are building communities known as Quilombos, free settlements founded by escaped slaves centuries ago. A man named Zizi continues that legacy today. He's working to create a sustainable eco-villages model Quilombos deep in the forest. In these communities, people live off the land, share foods, share electricity, and live without money. The goal isn't isolation, it's liberation, to rebuild the kind of secular society that existed before slavery, where no one is above anyone else and life is lived in harmony. That is the true resistance, not just fighting racism but creating new systems that reject exploitation altogether. What is fascinating is how black and white Americans react to these stories. For black Americans, it's likely looking into a mirror showing what America might have looked like if slavery had lasted another 23 years. if Reconstruction had never happened, for white Americans is an uncomfortable reflection too, a reminder that whiteness as a concept wasn't born in America alone. It was exported, globalized, and weaponized everywhere. When black and white Americans watch these reports about whitening policies, Confederate descendants, and model-day slavery, the reactions are mixed: shock, anger, sadness, and confusion. Many black Americans feel heartbreak seeing their brothers and sisters in Brazil living under the same shadows, different flag, same system, while some white Americans are genuinely stunned. They thought slavery was a relic of the past, only tied to America, not realizing that Brazil had more slaves, longer, and with more brutality. It raises the question: how do nations built on slavery ever move beyond it when the mindset survives? Because the truth is, you can admonish slavery on paper, but if you don't admonish the mentality, it mutates. It becomes systemic racism. It becomes class heritage. It becomes police violence, colorism, and cultural erasure. The idea of whitening didn't just vanish after the 90s. It still shapes Brazil beauty standards, media representation, and even politics. Turn on Brazilian TV and you will see mostly light-skinned actors. In corporate offices, in Congress, in modeling agency, whiteness still dominates. Meanwhile, the favelists, the slums remain overwhelmingly black. It's no coincidence, it's design. And yet, out of that oppression came one of the richest cultures on earth: samba, capoeira, candomblé, carnival, all born from African resistance. The very thing that makes Brazil beautiful are the things it once tried to erase. When black Americans hear about the Confederates still waving Confederate flags in Brazil, the reaction is usually disbelief. How could the descendants of slave owners still celebrate that ideology abroad? But the truth is, racism is portable. It crosses oceans, it adapts to new languages, it builds new flags, but the meaning stays the same. Some Confederates communities claim it's just about heritage, but that word has always been code. Heritage for who? For the enslavers, not the enslaved. And now, young Brazilians, both black and white, are pushing back. They are protesting Confederate festivals. They are demanding the flag be banned. They are calling out the hypocrisy of celebrating the very system that dehumanized millions. The message is clear: heritage without humanity is just hate repackaged. This is why this conversation matter, why videos like this exist, because when you connect the dots, you see the pattern. The transatlantic slave trade didn't just end, it evolved. It turned into global anti-blackness, into color heritage, into whitening campaigns, into systems that keep the same groups on top and the same groups at the bottom. When black and white Americans react together in Brazil history, is not just about Brazil, it's about confronting the roots of white supremacy that shaped the entire Western Hemisphere. Brazil tried to whiten its population, the US tried to segregate it. Different methods, same mission: protect whiteness at all costs. But history doesn't stay buried, it resurfaces in faces, in stories, in DNA, in the art, in the rhythm of drums that survive centuries of attempts to silence them. Even in today's Brazil, when a black child dances capoeira, they are moving in the footsteps of warriors who once disguised combat as dance to resist slavery. When a woman wraps her hair in a tumba, she's wearing the crown her ancestors were beating for. And when a man names his son Zumbi, after Zumbi does Palmares, the leader of Brazil's largest quilombo, he's reminding the world that freedom isn't a gift, it's a fight. The racial whitening project may have tried to erase blackness, but it failed because you can't erase what built the foundation. Every brick of Brazil, every rhythm, every flavor, every melody, all of it carries Africa, and no policy, no government, no whitening campaign can take that away. That is the truth the world is finally waking up to. From American commentators reacting online to Afro-Brazilian activists fighting on the ground, there is a new awareness growing, a shared realization that this isn't just Brazil history of Americans' history, it's human history. And until the descendants of the enslaved are free, truly free, in every nation that profited from their pen, that history isn't over.
And if you have watched up to this extent, don't forget to please leave me your own thought in the comment section of what you think of this video. And please do not forget that we do not support any form of bullying and harassment. We are just here for educational and informative purposes. So lovelies, wanna just share your thought? Subscribe to this channel if you're yet to do that, and I will see you lovelies when I upload the next one.